The Seneca Falls Convention and the History of Women's Suffrage, a Movement for Equality. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was an activist in the abolitionist movement, the temperance movement, and the women's suffrage movement. In July of 1848, she met with Lucretia Mott, Jane Hunt, Mary Ann McClintock, and Martha Coffin Wright, where they discussed women's rights and decided to organize the first women's rights convention in Seneca Falls, New York. The Seneca Falls Convention took place on July 19th and 20th, 1848, in Seneca Falls, New York. Roughly 300 men and women gathered in a local church to participate. The participants drafted the Declaration of Sentiments, a writing based off of the Declaration of Independence that includes 15 grievances. The grievances are categorized into religion, education, family, economics, and society. The grievances describe a life of oppression that is lived by women of the United States. The 1848 Seneca Falls Convention was the first of its kind. The momentum of the women's suffrage movement was growing fast. Over the next 12 years, 10 national women's suffrage conventions were held. Many suffragists also fought for temperance and abolition. The abolition movement, or the anti-slavery movement, was picking up speed during this time. When the American Civil War began in 1861, the women's suffrage movement paused, and suffragists turned and focused their attentions on the abolition movement. After the Civil War ended in 1865, the 14th and 15th Amendments were soon passed. The 14th Amendment, passed in 1868, guarantees all citizens constitutional protection. The problem is, the amendment describes citizens as male. Then, when the 15th Amendment is passed in 1870, granting the right to vote regardless of race to citizens, suffragists push politicians to extend the right to vote to women. In 1869, the National Women's Suffrage Association was founded by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, another women's rights movement leader. In 1872, she voted for Ulysses S. Grant and was arrested, tried, and convicted in 1873 for voting. The first vote on women's suffrage was taken to the Senate and defeated in 1887. 1 year later, the National Council of Women in the United States was established to encourage the advancement of women in society. In 1890, the National American Women's Suffrage Association was founded and led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Between the years 1890 and 1925 is considered the Progressive Era. Women became more political, bringing up the issue of women's suffrage. In 1892, Olympia Brown founded the Federal Suffrage Association to campaign for women's suffrage. The 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote in 1920. Between 1878, when the amendment was introduced to Congress, and 1920, when it was ratified, the women's suffrage movement picked up momentum. With the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, saying, "The rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex," women could finally vote. However, women of color's votes were suppressed. Taxes and literacy tests kept poorer members of minorities from voting. The stories of African American suffragists were concealed and forgotten. Native Americans, Asian Americans, and African Americans faced many obstacles when trying to vote. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper was a prominent African American writer and orator who is famous for her statement at the 1866 National Women's Rights Convention, where she told the crowd, "You white women speak here of rights, I speak of wrongs," speaking out against the racial divides within the women's suffrage movement. Mary Ann Shadd Cary was the first African American woman to publish a newspaper where she advocated for abolition. When black suffragists were pushed out of the mainstream suffrage movement by white suffragists, suffragist Mary Church Terrell and others formed the National Association of Colored Women. Mary Church Terrell was also one of the first black women to graduate from college, at Oberlin College. Ida B. Wells was a prominent activist and a well-respected journalist of the early 20th century. When she and others joined a suffrage march in Washington, D.C. in 1913, Alice Paul, a leader in the suffrage movement, told them to walk at the back of the crowd. "Either I go with you or not at all," she told organizers. "I am not taking the stand because I personally wish for recognition. I'm doing it for the future benefit of my whole race. Nannie Helen Burroughs gave more than 200 speeches across the United States that stressed the issue of women's rights, as well as their self-reliance and economic freedom. Even when men and women, regardless of race, could vote, some groups were excluded. Native Americans could not vote until the Snyder Act of 1924 that gave them citizenship. It wasn't until 1952 that Asian immigrant women were allowed to become citizens with the Immigration and Nationality Act. Women in the United States can vote, but what about the rest of the world? Many countries granted women suffrage shortly after the US did, but being able to vote doesn't end discrimination immediately. What is the future of women's rights?